Hello everybody and welcome back. This next video is going to be on a topic that I see lots of INTPs discussing and on which many INTPs and other rationals pride themselves, and something which I've blogged about a little bit before in the past, and I'd like to do a little bit more in-depth treatment of here, and that is rationality, or the use of logic. Many rationals really pride themselves on this and say that, oh, well, you know, our primary mode of engaging the world and processing information is a rational one, and that makes us more reliable, more intelligent than feelers or idealists or those touchy-feely, sensey people, and that of course is not something that any rational INTP or otherwise should be engaging in, for a number of reasons, which I'm going to list here. So the reasons why I want to address this topic are threefold, and I did make myself notes this time, so a little less rambly in this video. So, few reasons why I want to go over this. First of all, like I said before, there's a lot of type bigotry out there, and there's a lot of I don't know, I guess rational superiority complex. And so apparently if you have an NT in your Myers-Briggs type, then that makes you somehow more intelligent or more reliable, or less, say, like, emotionally compromised. And I admit to having used those sorts of arguments in the past, and having engaged in a kind of type bigotry that even if it wasn't Myers-Briggs related, I've accused people in the past of saying of being overly emotional in their handling of issues and problems, or their argumentation style, or in their pursuance of truth, and that's not fair, and it's not accurate, which is something I'm going to talk about a little bit later. Second reason is that this perspective perpetuates a serious misunderstanding of how the brain works, and also the limits of logic and what logic is. And thirdly, from my perspective, and from what I've seen online and elsewhere, it leads INTPs into even more fear and loathing of their own very underdeveloped emotional faculties. And I'm talking here, not everyone buys into the cognitive functions theory related to Myers-Briggs, but I find them helpful, even if there isn't any empirical evidence for them, which is important. If you're claiming that you're doing science, then you need to have empirical evidence. And unfortunately, the evidence for these cognitive functions tend to be based on the writings of Myers and Jung, and appeals to authority are never accepted as dogma in the scientific community. So unfortunately, all we really have to go on is anecdotal evidence for these cognitive functions. But I think that they are helpful as far as helping us figuring out what our strengths and our weaknesses are, and how we prioritize the ways that we go about interacting with the world. So the inferior function for INTPs is extroverted feeling, and this is a function that has to do with sensing the feelings of others around you, noticing social cues, experiencing other people's emotions very keenly, and all of those sorts of things, whereas introverted feeling has more to do with an understanding of your own internal emotional state. So because this is such an inferior function for INTPs, we have many of us have a very fraught relationship with our emotional experiences and our handling of other people's emotions. So we tend to either downplay them, repress them, whether you want to use the psychological definition of repress, or just the common sense sort of like squashing definition is fine either way. And also, emotions to us can feel very messy and very scary. So I think that leads to quite a bit of I guess, rational superiority. So, few points. that I want to use to explain why this rational or INTP relationship to logic and rationality is somewhat problematic and unhealthy. First one, and I've said this before in my blog, that logic is like black magic. It really depends, or the outcome of one's use of logic really depends on one's starting premises and the rules one follows in the logical sequence. If you're following, logic is essentially attempting to solve a problem or make an argument following a set of rules. And one could say that there are set logical reasoning rules that you get into when you're doing symbolic logic and things like that. But someone like me who considers themselves a postmodernist recognizes that what one culture considers a quote logical rule, or a rule for a rational rule for a logical argumentation style, is completely, I guess, culturally constructed, or at least culturally determined. So when logic is used in that way, following a set of rules, being very careful about the way that you're reasoning, you can be used to justify just about anything, and result in a justification that prides itself on its quote universality, which in fact it doesn't have, because it's following rules that are entirely, or not entirely, but at least partially culturally determined. So I guess the takeaway from this point is that logic is a tool for problem solving and testing theories, not a key to universal truth. So the second point, or at least continuing on this logic is black magic, point number one, that when divorced from the context in which it's used, or consideration of those contexts, consideration of the subjectively entrenched positionality of the logical thinker, the real life consequences of its application can be, in my opinion, powerfully dehumanizing. And it can be a dehumanizing tool that fails to really account for the reality of alternative value systems and lived subjectivities. So it assumes, it does what I would criticize a lot of, say, like the patriarchy, or classical and Orientalist historians of doing, is elevating their own subjective perspectives to the realm or the position of objectivity, and pretending, or at least duping yourself into believing, that what you have perceived and argued from your own entrenched subjective perspective, and that you translate that into something that applies to everyone everywhere at all times. And that's simply inaccurate, and it's simply it's pretty arrogant is what it is. My second point is about emotion, and that is emotion's not useless. Emotions and feelings, they happen in the brain. They're cognitive processes, just like all other reasoning tasks. They aren't birthed from some spooky, irrational internal nether region, like sin or desire or temptation. That's a very I think of the relationship a lot of INTPs and other rationals have with emotion is akin to a kind of classical or late antique patristic fear of the passions. Having myself studied asceticism for a long time, there's this kind of, and also like medieval scholasticism, there's this kind of fear of the passions as something that is subject verb agreement. Sorry, the passions are problematic for any group of people who wants to claim that rational thought that is ordered by a particular set of objective rules is akin to divine or enlightened thinking, whereas emotions and passions are the result of some kind of lower lower order, naturally derived mud body, animal nature, animal self. And that's well, problematic for a number of reasons that you could possibly think of, in that it's antiquated, it's sexist, it manifests in very sexist ways, and it is, well, it's anthropocentric in the way that it privileges, say, certain parts, elevated parts of the self, like the soul or the reason, to levels that don't freaking exist. We are, or at least it could be argued, that our animal nature is our total nature, and rationality is a part of our animal nature. And trying to say that it's some kind of divine spark that comes to raise our animal nature out of its orgiastic, dirty, impassioned state is frankly kind of disturbing. So I think that, yes, there's a very difficult, fraught relationship between many rationalists and their emotions. That's kind of silly and irrational, so stop doing it. Yeah, emotions, they help us navigate our social landscape in many ways. They also help us navigate our physical landscape. They help us to understand and process, or at least make sense of our experience of certain stimuli, whether they're, and to make also value judgments about them. Now, I'm not saying that all value should be determined by, what feels good or what feels bad. I'm not completely utilitarian in that sense. But that's more information. That's more information that helps you make a decision about something. And that shouldn't be disregarded. It's not misleading. It might not be all of the information required to make a decision. You might need to bring in some of your rational, logical reasoning skills, but it's not useless information. Also, I think one good point that I hadn't thought of before, and now it's just kind of come up on me, is that emotion is absolutely essential to memory formation. And things that can be emotionally integrated, and you can have a holistic and well-processed emotional experience of an event, is more easily incorporated into one's autobiographical memory and therefore experience of self. So you feel more interconnected with your world and your experience of being a person, and that's really important. Just for getting along in life, getting along with other people, not feeling like a stranger. And I think that that's one thing INTPs certainly I have a difficult experience of. Point number 3, final point, I'll stop rambling in a minute, is that the brain is not a Turing machine. And what I mean by that is that we are really disserved by over-computational models of cognition, because our brains are not computers. They were not designed, if we can use that word, to operate rationally. They're not designed as logical computing machines. They're designed by evolution to process information adaptively. And adaptively does not mean rationally or logically. It means using the appropriate heuristic to make decisions about information or process information in the most adaptive way possible, depending on one's circumstances. And if that's a survival circumstance, you're going to be, your brain is going to disregard a lot of very essential information that, well, it might be essential in another situation, but for a survival situation, all you need to know is danger, fast, move, now, etc. Our brains, there are multiple levels of the brain that can be identified as having similarities with more and less recent evolutionary ancestors, and emotions are most of our emotions are, or our base emotions, I guess you could call them, are a process of, or are the product of what's called the reptilian brain, or the not the reptilian brain, but the the early mammalian brain. And that's a part of us. That's who we are. That is our animal nature. That's what it means to be here. I guess if you could say something a little bit more profound about it. And it's not, again, it's not useless information. It is an essential part of being an animal and being a person. And I love it. I love it. I hate it when people say, "Oh, you're being so emotional. You need to use more of your brain." Well, if you're being emotional, you are using a significant portion of your brain, and you're using a much older and much more primal part of your brain that is feeding you information that's not. It's not misleading information. It's true. It's giving you true information about your experience of a situation. Unfortunately, it's incomplete information, and it's not information that's been particularly well filtered. So again, there's this kind of hierarchy of rationality and emotional experience that is completely unjustified, because how does one establish a hierarchy for different cognitive processes that are absolutely all the time essential, but some are more essential than others at separate times? So it's like switching gears in a car. You can't make third gear isn't higher priority or higher, status over first or second gear. It's just a different gear that you use in a different situation versus another. So ending points. Rationality is a function of the logical and semiotic systems in which it's used, or within which it's employed, and which are also implicated in its use. You cannot use your logic or your rationality outside of your experience of living within a particular meaning system. It's just not going to happen. Things in themselves do not have meaning. They only have meaning within relationship to other things. And those relationships, those significances, I suppose, are the product of a system of meaning that authorizes those relational meanings. And that's a product of culture, not a product of reason, not a product of platonic forms that exist, in the ether or in the realm of logic or whatever. So, for example, a shaman who believes or who is a part of a meaning system or a worldview that believes there is a cause and effect relationship between ritual and environmental circumstances is behaving absolutely 100% rationally when she chooses to do a rain dance. That is a rational response to a drought, depending upon her involvement in a particular meaning and belief system. A rational response to a drought for someone who doesn't belong to that belief system is water conservation. That's a logical response, because we know that there is a logical, or at least a relationship, cause and effect relationship between having water and not dying. Or for example, we know that there are certain ways to manipulate or arrange the public use of water that can result in more I don't know. Anyway, you see what I mean. I'm not a city planner, so I'm kind of failing on the water examples right now, even though I live in Southern California, which means that I should be much more aware of this because of fire season and all of that. But so I hope you get what I mean when I say logic can be like black magic, and we should avoid this kind of rational type bigotry, and we need to stop with the my reason is better than your emotions, because usually that's a case of my lady protesting too much, I think, because the rationals, many of the rationals, are intimidated by their emotions and don't know how to use them adaptively, because it's not their primary method of engaging with the world. And so if you think about it in these terms, it might be a little bit more helpful, and you might be able to do a little bit more kind of, again, working on that introversion, INTPs, introverted self-awareness, to figure out in what cases are my emotions giving me accurate information that is usable, in what cases is my imagination running away with my emotions and making up scenarios for kind of overblown or overwhelming emotions, and how can I work to make sure that I use my emotions adaptively and along with as kind of the handmaiden of my rationality. So I hope that was helpful. And again, if you want more, please subscribe or follow me on Tumblr. Both and or either or. Both are love. Both are wonderful. Again, this is just I'm not doing this for followers. I'm not doing this to get YouTube famous or whatever that is. This is a big step for me, talking aloud and on video. This is just as much for me as it is for anyone else. So drop me a line and let me know what you think. Thanks. Have a great afternoon.